Welcome back to another Q&A here. The first question comes from Hector, and he asks, I'm doing 1,000 push-ups a week and 350 pull-ups. Is that enough to maintain? Yeah, man, that's probably enough to maintain. But rather than thinking of like specific numbers, like is this many push-ups or this many pull-ups enough to maintain, I would rather think about things in terms of hard sets. So I would say that if you're lifting in the gym, if you're doing like 6 or 7 hard sets per muscle per week, you're probably very easily going to maintain. But if you only have access to body weight exercises, it might take 9 to 10, 11 hard sets per week. Like, I think if you err on about 10 hard sets per week with your body weight stuff, you're going to be fine. All right. So 350 pull-ups, let's say you do 10 reps per set. What is that? 35 sets for pull-ups? I think sometimes, math is hard and sometimes I'm not good at it, but I think that is 350. So yeah, I would say that was plenty, and if not on the verge of overdoing it. And I think that some people actually have overdone it with the body weight stuff and just gone nuts with it. But I do think that this is kind of a good time to where you almost have to play things a little bit more by feel. And, if you do 3 sets of body weight squats and you're like, wow, that feels like about what 1 set of regular squats would feel like, then you might have to keep doing sets until you get to the point to where you get a good pump and you get a little bit of following day homeostatic disruption of soreness, fatigue, and that sort of thing. So this is a good time to really let those indicators of soreness, pumps, following day fatigue, how hard it felt to really guide your training rather than getting too caught up in any specific amount of sets or reps or anything like that. All right? Because, for me, when I'm doing like banded bicep curls, I feel like I almost have to do twice the sets to get in a similar stimulus to when I'm doing curls in the gym. But when I'm doing Bulgarian split squats with a backpack and dumbbells, I actually think that feels like a pretty similar stimulus to when I do split squats in the gym. So this is a good time to where, hey, we're still shooting for a little bit of soreness, a little bit of fatigue, good pumps, a subjective difficulty of, hey, that was actually pretty challenging. And this is a good time to really pay attention to those rather than some of these like more quantitative measures of reps and how much weight you're using even and that sort of thing. All right. So yes, that sounds like enough, but I'm not too focused on the specific numbers. All right. How to improve accuracy when gauging reps in reserve, and are there any exercises that I find are difficult to gauge? So when I first started using reps in reserve, I thought it was very difficult to gauge reps in reserve on pulling exercises. But I think that was more so a matter of I just had kind of a dog shit mind-muscle connection for those pulling exercises. And that leads me to think that, hey, one of the best things you can do to improve your ability to gauge reps in reserve is to make sure that your technique is locked in and make sure that you are getting a good mind-muscle connection on your exercises. All right. So whether that's watching technique videos on YouTube and stuff like that to make sure that you've got it figured out, or you're a Revive Stronger member site and you have access to our forum videos, stuff like that, all those things can help. But I would definitely try to make sure that your technique is locked in, and then you can worry about reps in reserve and stuff like that because it does get easier. Now, what are some things that you can still do to improve reps in reserve if you're struggling with it? Well, for one, videoing yourself and watching the speed or the velocity of the bar, how fast it's moving, can really help. Because when I started using reps in reserve and I would do a set of squats, I would be like, man, that was a tough set. I'd watch it on video. I don't know, man. I think you had at least a few more reps there. And I think that it can really make you aware of whether you're sandbagging or not. And this can go the other way too, to where you're grinding out each and every rep. And I've had clients where I'm like, I think that might have been a little bit closer to failure than we want. You got to put it in a nice way and that sort of thing. And that video feedback can really be helpful, and having a coach kind of help you out with that can help. Now, one thing that is tricky is my 2 reps in reserve could look different than someone else's 2 reps in reserve. So it is something that you almost have to play with yourself. And in the final week of your program, when you take sets to failure, then you can kind of look back and be like, okay, how accurate was I there? And you can kind of adjust from there. And if you see what a video to failure looks like, then you can more easily compare what like 2 or 3 reps in reserve looks like. So taking sets to failure in the final week, videoing those, comparing it to other sets throughout your mesocycle over time, you will get better at it. Like usually for clients, it's like an adjustment period for the first mesocycle. And after that, they really get in a nice rhythm. And I would say for my clients, usually it's pulling back a little bit more in those first weeks, but you do get people that sandbag a little bit more. So try to be aware of which way you might lean there. And I would say when in doubt, maybe make sure that you're training a little bit harder and within a few reps from reserve, but also not grinding out reps to failure. All right. And that's what we're ultimately trying to do there is, okay, we want to be close enough to failure, but not grinding out reps to where our stimulus to fatigue ratio is piss poor. So I really think that as long as you're kind of like in between that 1 to 3 reps in reserve range, you're accumulating volume and you're adjusting to be within your MEV and MRV, like volume over the long term or hypertrophy over the long term, going to be pretty similar. All right. So I hope that helps. Next question. What bodybuilding research am I most interested in at this point? 2 big topics come to mind. For one, body fat set point. That is one that is almost always the most interesting to me because I'm a former fatty and I'm just very curious about that. And so many people have a tough time maintaining lost body fat. And I just think that there's more going on there that we're aware of. And a question that a lot of people have is, okay, if you lose a certain amount of body fat, are you always going to be somewhat suppressed in other areas? Like, is your body always going to try to work down your energy expenditure by potentially suppressing other things like lower leptin levels and that sort of thing? And I would say that it's not like an on or off switch. I would say if you lose 40 pounds or something like that, yes, you might have lower leptin levels, a little bit more hunger, but I would say that you still probably get to a point where you recover your leptin enough and that sort of thing and your hormones enough to where you do feel generally good. But it is interesting where that lower end of that settling point is, whether you can really change your settling point that much, what factors influence whether you can or you can't. Like if you're overweight in adolescence, is that different than if you were only overweight as an adult and lost weight as an adult? Are there other things that you could do like cryolipolysis to maybe get rid of some fat cells so you can lower your settling point? I think there's a lot of cool questions here in this field that I'm definitely interested about and I think could be pretty cool in the future. So that's the first one. Second one is whether you can specifically train for different types of hypertrophy. So does changing your rep range really adjust that? And there are some studies on this, but the studies are kind of few and far between. And there's just a handful of studies on higher versus lower loads and whether that has a preferential effect on muscle hypertrophy for type 1, type 2 fibers. And in general, it doesn't seem like there's a big difference, but mechanistically, it still kind of makes sense. So I still think that one's kind of up in the air. Also, resensitization phases, weeks off from training. Does that lead to more hypertrophy in the long term compared to just never doing maintenance phases and never doing resensitizations? I think that right now it seems as though it doesn't lead to any worse hypertrophy if you do lower volume maintenance phases and stuff like that. but I'll be really curious to whether does that actually lead to better hypertrophy in the long term? Because some people look at it from the perspective of, hey, if you can do these low volume maintenance phases and get the same hypertrophy over the long term, why wouldn't you do that? Well, for one, we like training and we like going to the gym. We like feeling like we're on that kind of hamster wheel of progress to where we're making that progress. And I would almost say if it's the same hypertrophy over the long term, even though technically you're doing more work if you don't take maintenance phases, then a lot of people would still opt for that route because they like going to the gym and training with higher volumes and that sort of thing. But I think if it starts to look like, hey, these maintenance phases might lead to better hypertrophy over the long term, then people will really start to do them more because we prioritize gains over what we just want to do all the time. All right? So those are a couple areas that I am most interested in. Number 4, will good mornings carry over to deadlifts? I think that the whole carryover thing is pretty tricky, and it's so hard to know whether one exercise did in fact carry over because there's so many other variables at play. And I would say in general, the things that are going to carry over the most to a certain lift are the things that look like that lift the most. So if you're trying to improve your deadlift, I would say doing variations of the deadlift, pause deadlifts, deficit deadlifts, deadlifts off of blocks or something like that. Most similar movements are going to probably carry over the most there. And I would say good mornings are probably more so an indirect effect of if you grow and gain more muscle in your glutes, your posterior chain, that sort of thing, it's going to increase your potential to have a stronger deadlift, but I doubt that someone would just do deadlifts for a mesocycle and then or good mornings for a mesocycle and then all of a sudden their deadlift just skyrockets. All right. So that's kind of what I'm thinking there. And the final question, is there specific rep range hypertrophy for certain fibers? So this is exactly what I just talked about. And right now it seems as though there's not. Like the evidence doesn't really support that high loads preferentially train or hypertrophy type 2 and low loads preferentially hypertrophy type 1 fibers, slower twitch fibers. Like I don't think that we have enough to really say that right now. And the evidence seems like there's not significant effects, but mechanistically, I still think that it does kind of make sense. And it wouldn't surprise me that over the long term, as we accumulate more research on it, that we do start to see slight trends maybe, but it is kind of tricky to say right now. I think it makes the most sense to hedge your bets a bit and work in a variety of rep ranges because we know that a variety of rep ranges can induce hypertrophy. So in general, 8 to 15 rep range for most stuff, but hey, go down to that 4 to 8 rep range some and go up to that 20 to 30 rep range some. Do some metabolite work. It keeps training fun and enjoyable, and if there are benefits, you are getting those. All right, so that is the Q&A this week. I appreciate all of you tuning in. Like, it really does mean a lot to me, and one of the ways that is going to help this channel grow and really help me out is if you would be willing to share this and if it helped you out in any way. So I appreciate you tuning in. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you next week.